Jake Martinez and High Admiral Kethvar flew their ships into the massive organic mothership knowing they would never come out alive. The interior was a nightmare of pulsing flesh and neural pathways that writhed like angry snakes. Trapped faces stared at them from the walls as they raced toward the ship's central core where the neural disruptor had to be placed. Kethvar's fighter was caught by organic tentacles just as they reached their target. The proud Zephyrian warrior used his ship's self-destruct to clear a path for Jake, while transmitting the activation codes for the neural weapon. Jake's ship was damaged and losing power, but he managed to deploy the device in the exact center of the mothership's brain before the organic defenses overwhelmed him. The neural disruptor activated with a pulse of energy that spread through the entire Devourer fleet like lightning through water. Captain Lisa Turner watched from the Liberty as the organic ships began to convulse and turn on each other. The tortured minds trapped inside the vessels finally rebelled against their captors, and the careful coordination of the fleet collapsed into chaos. Dr. Helen Grant monitored the weapon's effects as it cascaded through the neural network. The frequency scrambled the organic communication system and freed the consciousness that had been enslaved for so long. Instead of staying to fight, the liberated minds chose to fade away peacefully rather than continue their tormented existence without the suffering of their victims to sustain them. The Devourer ships began to die. The organic hulls withered and cracked as the neural pathways that controlled them failed. Some ships exploded outright while others simply drifted apart like decomposing corpses. The fleet that had consumed entire civilizations was finally consuming itself. Admiral Ross coordinated the final assault on the confused and weakening enemy forces. Human and Zephyrian ships worked together to destroy the remaining Devourer vessels before they could adapt to the neural weapon. For the first time in galactic history, the parasitic species was not just defeated but completely eliminated. The battle ended in victory, but the cost was terrible. Hundreds of ships had been lost and thousands of brave people from both species had died fighting the galactic threat. Jake Martinez and Kethvar were remembered as heroes who saved not just their own races but every form of organic life in the galaxy. Captain Daniel Hayes was promoted to admiral and given command of the joint patrol forces that would guard against future threats. He established monitoring stations throughout the sector and trained mixed crews of humans and Zephyrians to work together. The old enemies had learned that cooperation was stronger than competition. Senator Patricia Collins became Earth's first ambassador to the surviving Zephyrians. She had argued for years that aliens could never be trusted, but the battle against the Devourers changed her mind. Collins worked to establish new colonies, where both species could live in peace and help each other rebuild what they had lost. Dr. Grant continued her research with Science Director Morthak, studying the remains of the Devourer fleet. They wanted to understand how such creatures had come to exist and make sure that nothing like them could ever threaten the galaxy again. Their work led to new technologies that would benefit both races. High Admiral Kethvar was mourned by his people as a warrior who found true honor in sacrifice. The Zephyrians built a monument to him and Jake Martinez side by side, showing that former enemies could become the greatest of friends. Children from both species learned their story and understood that courage meant protecting others even at the cost of your own life. The surviving Zephyrian civilians were given homes on human worlds where they could start new lives. At first there was suspicion and fear on both sides, but slowly the two races learned to live together. Human children played with Zephyrian young ones and discovered that friendship was possible, even between very different species. Admiral Ross signed the first peace treaty between humans and Zephyrians aboard the Liberty 6 months after the battle. The document established joint defense agreements and trade partnerships that would benefit both races. It also created a council where representatives from each species could work together on problems that affected everyone. Lisa Turner was promoted to admiral and given command of the new joint fleet. She had disobeyed orders to help her former enemies and in doing so had saved the galaxy from a threat that neither race could have faced alone. Turner became a symbol of the cooperation that was possible when old hatreds were set aside for the greater good. Tony Walker established refugee assistance programs that helped displaced beings from both species find new homes and new purposes. His work showed that the bonds formed in crisis could last long after the immediate danger had passed. Former enemies became neighbors and neighbors became friends. Amy Brooks became the head of the new communication network that connected human and Zephyrian worlds. Her ability to understand alien languages made her invaluable in building the relationships that would keep the peace between the two races. She often remembered the first distress call that had started everything. 6 months after the Great Battle, Admiral Turner sat on the bridge of her flagship when Amy brought her another distress signal. This one came from an unknown species that was fleeing something in the galactic core. The message was desperate and afraid, and asked for help from anyone who would listen. Turner looked at her mixed crew of humans and Zephyrians and smiled. She had learned that helping others was not weakness but strength. She had learned that former enemies could become the strongest allies when they faced a common threat together. Turner gave the order to respond to the new distress call. The joint fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading toward another species that needed their help. This time they would not be going alone. They had each other, and they had learned that cooperation could overcome any challenge. The Liberty and her sister ships raced through space toward their next mission. Behind them, the worlds of 2 former enemy races lived in peace. Ahead of them, other beings waited for rescue. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but it was less dangerous when brave people stood together against the darkness. Turner thought about Jake Martinez and Kethvar and all the others who had died to make this peace possible. She promised their memory that the alliance they had bought with their lives would protect others who needed help. The war between humans and Zephyrians was over, but their partnership in defending the innocent had just begun. The Devourer Armada arrived like a storm made of living nightmares. Captain Roger Chen of the UES Defiance was among the first to see them up close, and his voice shook when he reported what his sensors found. The enemy motherships were the size of small moons, and they pulsed with organic light. Smaller vessels swarmed around them like insects around a corpse. Every ship in the fleet had once belonged to someone else. Admiral Ross coordinated the combined human and Zephyrian forces from the Bridge of the Liberty. The old admiral had fought in many battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. The organic fleet moved with perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single vast mind. When human ships fired missiles, the entire enemy formation shifted to minimize damage. When Zephyrian energy weapons targeted weak points, the Devourers adapted their defenses in real time. Senator Patricia Collins stood on the bridge of the Valiant, watching the enemy approach. She had come to arrest Captain Turner, but now she found herself commanding a battleship in the fight for galactic survival. Collins had spent years arguing that humans should never trust aliens. Now she was fighting alongside the same Zephyrians she had called monsters. The battle began when the Devourer Vanguard reached weapons range. Long tentacles shot out from the organic ships, trying to grab and consume the defending vessels. Captain Daniel Hayes of the Thunder barely escaped when one of the appendages wrapped around his ship's hull. The metal began to soften and change until Hayes fired his engines at full power and broke free. Major Sam Tucker led the first boarding mission against a damaged Devourer vessel. What his team found inside made several soldiers sick, and others refused to continue. The ship's interior was a maze of organic tunnels lined with neural tissue. Trapped within the walls were the preserved remains of countless beings from dozens of different species. Their minds were still active and aware, and they screamed silently for release from their eternal prison. Sam discovered that the captured consciousness were not just passengers. They were the ship's computer system. Every calculation and decision was processed through the suffering minds of the consumed. The organic technology literally fed on their pain and used their intelligence to become smarter and more dangerous. Dr. Helen Grant worked with her Zephyrian colleague, Science Director Morthak, to find a weakness in the enemy fleet. Together they studied the neural networks that connected all the Devourer ships. The organic communication system was incredibly complex, but it had one critical flaw. If the network could be disrupted, the ships would lose coordination and might even attack each other. Helen and Morthak developed a weapon that could broadcast a specific frequency to scramble the neural pathways, but delivering the device would require getting very close to the center of the enemy formation, where the largest motherships controlled the entire fleet. It would be a suicide mission for whoever volunteered to carry it. High Admiral Kethvar immediately offered to lead the attack. The proud Zephyrian warrior said his people had brought this threat to human space, and it was their duty to stop it. Kethvar believed that dying in battle against such an enemy would restore honor to the Zephyrian name. Commander Jake Martinez argued that the mission needed both human and Zephyrian technology to succeed. The neural disruptor required Zephyrian science, but human ships were better at surviving in heavy combat. Jake volunteered to fly alongside Kethvar, knowing that neither of them would likely return. The main battle raged around them as volunteer crews prepared for the desperate mission. Human and Zephyrian ships fought side by side against an enemy that seemed to learn from every shot fired at it. Captain Lisa Turner coordinated the defense, while trying not to think about the brave people who were about to sacrifice themselves. Commander Steve Johnson of the Storm discovered that the Devourers were not just adapting to human weapons. They were incorporating the technology into their own ships. Destroyed human vessels were being consumed and rebuilt as organic hybrids that combined the worst aspects of both technologies. The situation grew more desperate as the enemy fleet pressed closer to the defending forces. Some of the Devourer ships began targeting the refugee vessels carrying Zephyrian civilians. The organic hunters seemed to prefer consuming beings who were afraid and helpless rather than warriors who fought back. Tony Walker led evacuation teams that moved the last civilians from the most exposed ships. He watched families saying goodbye to fathers and mothers who stayed behind to fight. Human and Zephyrian children played together in the cargo holds while above them, the battle for their future continued. Amy Brooks detected something new in the enemy communications. The Devourer fleet was receiving signals from somewhere else. Long-range sensors showed more organic ships approaching from multiple directions. This was not just one fleet. It was part of a much larger force that was converging on their position. Dr. Grant realized that the Devourers had been calling for reinforcements since the battle began. The neural network that connected their ships also reached across vast distances to coordinate with other fleets. If they did not win quickly, more enemies would arrive until the defenders were completely overwhelmed. Jake and Kethvar launched their mission with a small force of the fastest ships from both fleets. They had to penetrate deep into the enemy formation and deploy the neural disruptor at the exact center where it would have maximum effect. Behind them, the main fleet fought to keep the Devourers busy and create an opening. The volunteer ships raced through space, dodging organic weapons and grasping tentacles. One by one, the escort vessels were caught and consumed until only Jake's ship and Kethvar's fighter remained. The two old enemies flew together toward the heart of the fleet that threatened to destroy everything they cared about. As they approached the massive mothership at the center of the formation, Jake could see the tortured faces of consumed beings trapped in its hull. Thousands of different species stared out with empty eyes while their minds powered the ship that had eaten them. The sight filled Jake with determination to end their suffering no matter what it cost. Kethvar transmitted a final message to his people before beginning the attack run. He said that sometimes the greatest victory came from knowing when to sacrifice yourself for others. He told the surviving Zephyrians to remember that honor was not about conquest but about protecting those who could not protect themselves. The two ships flew into the waiting jaws of the enemy mothership carrying the weapon that might save the galaxy. Behind them, the combined fleet fought on, hoping that their sacrifice would not be in vain. The outcome of the battle would determine whether organic life had a future, or whether everything would be consumed by the hungry darkness from the galactic core. Back on Earth, the news of Captain Turner's mission had spread like fire through dry grass. Admiral Kevin Ross sat in his office looking at reports and messages that made his head hurt. Half the government wanted Lisa court-martialed for helping the enemy. The other half wanted to know why Earth's fleet was not prepared for this new threat. Senator Patricia Collins led the angry voices in the Earth Senate. She stood at her podium with her gray hair pulled back tight and her voice sharp like broken glass. She said Turner had betrayed humanity by helping the aliens who had killed millions of humans during the war. Collins argued that Earth should let the Zephyrians and these Devourers destroy each other. She said it would solve two problems at once. But Admiral Ross had seen the sensor data that Turner sent back. The Devourer ships were unlike anything in human records. They were fast and strong, and they learned from every battle. If they could defeat the Zephyrian Empire, then they could certainly defeat Earth. Ross knew that sometimes you had to choose between bad options and worse. Bunzot Dr. Helen Grant worked day and night with Zephyrian scientists aboard the colony ship. The alien researchers were different from human ones, but they shared the same desire to understand their enemy. Together, they studied pieces of destroyed Devourer ships, and what they found made Helen's stomach turn cold. The organic technology was not just alive. It was intelligent. Each ship contained thousands of neural pathways that had once belonged to different species. The Devourers did not just capture ships. They captured minds and made them part of a giant thinking machine that grew smarter with every victim. Helen discovered that the Devourer fleet was like a single organism with many parts. When one ship learned something new, all the others knew it instantly. This explained why they adapted so quickly to new weapons. It also explained why they were so hard to surprise or outmaneuver. Commander Tony Walker spent his time helping Zephyrian refugees move from their damaged ships to human vessels. It was strange work because most of the humans on his crew still hated the aliens. But when they saw Zephyrian children crying for their parents or old ones who could barely walk, the hatred became harder to hold on to. The Zephyrian families were different from what Tony expected. They cared for each other the same way human families did. The parents protected their children, and the children played games and laughed when they felt safe. The old ones told stories, and the young ones listened with wide eyes. Tony realized that maybe humans and Zephyrians were not so different after all. High Admiral Kethvar shared his knowledge about the Devourers with Captain Turner and her officers. He told them that his people had been fighting this enemy for 50 years. The Zephyrian Empire had seemed strong and proud, but it was really running away from something much worse. All their attacks on other races had been desperate attempts to find allies or weapons that could stop the Devourers. Kethvar explained that the Devourers came from the galactic core where very old and dangerous things lived. His people's legends said the organic ships were created by a race that tried to become immortal by merging with their technology. Instead, they became something hungry and empty that could never be satisfied. Captain Turner received 2 different messages from Admiral Ross. The official message ordered her to return to Earth immediately and face judgment for disobeying orders. The secret message told her to continue the mission and gather as much information as possible about the new enemy. Ross was playing a dangerous game with Earth's government, but he believed the survival of humanity was at stake. Meanwhile, the main Devourer fleet grew closer every hour. Long-range sensors showed ships of incredible size accompanied by thousands of smaller vessels. Some of the large ones were clearly converted Zephyrian warships. Others looked like they had once belonged to species that humans had never seen. All of them moved together in perfect coordination like parts of a single mind. Lieutenant Amy Brooks intercepted communication signals between the Devourer ships. The messages were not in any language she recognized. Instead, they seemed to be direct transfers of thought and emotion. The organic fleet shared fear and hunger and anger, as if these feelings were food that made them stronger. Dr. Grant made a disturbing discovery while studying the enemy signals. Hidden in the organic chatter were fragments of familiar voices speaking human words. Some of the Devourer ships contained pieces of the human vessels that had been captured during scouting missions over the past few years. The consumed crews were still alive inside the alien. Technology and their suffering powered the ships that had eaten them. Commander Jake Martinez coordinated defensive preparations as the enemy fleet approached. Human and Zephyrian officers worked together to plan battle tactics, but it was difficult because their ships and weapons were so different. What they did have was determination and the knowledge that losing this fight meant more than death. It meant becoming part of the enemy. The refugee evacuation continued as more Zephyrian civilians were moved to human ships. The colony vessel was too damaged to fight and too slow to run. It would have to be abandoned when the battle started. Kethvar made the painful decision to destroy his people's last great ship, rather than let it fall into Devourer hands. Senator Collins arrived at the fleet aboard the battleship UES Valiant. She came to arrest Captain Turner and bring the human ships back to Earth. But when she saw the approaching enemy armada, her attitude began to change. The organic ships were huge and terrible, and there were so many of them that they blocked out the stars. Collins had fought in the Zephyrian War, and she thought she knew what alien enemies looked like. But the Devourers were different. They felt wrong in a way that made her skin crawl and her mind want to hide. These were not warriors or conquerors. They were something that should not exist. Admiral Ross finally arrived with the entire Earth fleet. Hundreds of human warships dropped out of hyperspace in battle formation. The Admiral had convinced Earth's government that humanity's survival depended on stopping the Devourers before they could reach human space. Even Senator Collins now agreed that some threats were too big for old grudges. The combined human and Zephyrian fleet prepared for the largest space battle in galactic history. Jake looked at the tactical displays showing their forces compared to the enemy, and felt his heart sink. They were outnumbered 10-1 by ships that learned and adapted and grew stronger with every victory. But they had something the Devourers did not understand. They had hope and they had each other. Human stubbornness and Zephyrian pride working together might be enough to surprise an enemy that thought all organic life was just food waiting to be consumed. The battle would decide whether two old enemy races could become something greater than either had been alone. The three human ships dropped out of hyperspace into a scene that Jake Martinez would never forget. The Liberty and her escorts Thunder and Storm found themselves looking at the biggest Zephyrian ship anyone had ever seen. The alien vessel was as long as a city and covered in the smooth gray metal that all Zephyrian ships used. But this ship was different. It had big round sections that looked like they were made for families to live in. This was not a warship. This was a colony ship full of civilians. The huge alien ship was surrounded by smaller vessels that Jake did not recognize. These strange ships looked like they were grown instead of built. Their hulls curved and twisted like living things, and they had no straight lines anywhere. Some of them seemed to breathe as they moved through space. Others had long tentacles that reached out toward the Zephyrian ship like hungry fingers. Captain Daniel Hayes of the Thunder was the first to speak. His voice came through the communication system sounding shocked. He said the alien attackers were trying to attach themselves to the Zephyrian ship. Where they touched the gray metal, it was changing color and becoming soft like flesh. Lisa Turner ordered her ships to move closer, but stay ready to fight. She wanted to understand what was happening before they got involved. Jake watched through the Liberty's sensors as more of the strange organic ships appeared from behind asteroids and small moons. There were dozens of them, and they all moved toward the colony ship like sharks smelling blood. Amy Brooks worked at her communication station trying to contact the Zephyrians. After several tries, a voice answered. The alien spoke in broken human language mixed with their own strange words. The voice belonged to someone called High Admiral Kethvar, and he sounded very tired and very afraid. Jake knew that name. Kethvar had led many attacks against human colonies during the war. He was famous for being smart and ruthless and never giving up. If Kethvar was scared, then these new enemies must be terrible indeed. Kethvar told them about the Devourers. He said they came from the center of the galaxy, where all the old stars lived. They traveled from system to system, eating everything they found. They did not just destroy ships and planets. They consumed them and made them part of their own fleet. Every ship they captured became another hunter in their pack. The Admiral said the Devourers had already eaten 17 different alien races. They had destroyed most of the Zephyrian Empire, including the homeworld. The colony ship carried the last survivors of his people, thousands of families, including children and old ones who had never fought in any war. Captain Lisa Turner had to make a choice. She could follow her orders and leave the Zephyrians to die, or she could help their old enemies fight against something that might threaten all life in the galaxy. She chose to fight. The Thunder and Storm moved to attack positions while the Liberty used its big guns to target the nearest Devourer ships. Jake watched as human weapons fired at the organic vessels. Laser beams and missiles struck the alien hulls, but instead of exploding, they seemed to be absorbed. The Devourer ships grew slightly larger after each hit, as if they were eating the energy. Commander Steve Johnson of the Storm found that kinetic weapons worked better. Solid metal projectiles fired at high speed could punch through the organic armor and cause real damage. The Devourer ships made horrible sounds when they were hurt. They screamed like living animals in pain. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos led the first meeting between human and Zephyrian officers in 10 years. She went aboard the colony ship with a small team and met with Admiral Kethvar face to face. The Zephyrian was tall and had 4 arms and skin that looked like gray stone. His eyes were large and completely black, and they showed intelligence and desperation. Kethvar explained more about their enemy. The Devourers did not just kill their victims. They kept them alive and used their minds to control the captured ships. Every vessel in a Devourer fleet had once belonged to someone else. The organic technology fed on the pain and fear of the trapped consciousness inside. Maria learned that the Devourers were almost impossible to stop once they got started. They adapted to any weapon used against them. They learned from every battle and became stronger. The only way to defeat them was to destroy them completely before they could change and grow. The battle continued around them as they talked. Human and Zephyrian ships fought side by side for the first time in history. Jake discovered that their weapons worked well together. Human kinetic guns could break through Devourer armor, while Zephyrian energy shields could protect human ships. from the organic weapons that tried to consume them. Dr. Helen Grant was the Liberty's science officer, and she studied the enemy ships through long-range sensors. She found that each Devourer vessel was connected to all the others through some kind of biological network. When one ship learned something new, all the others learned it too. This made them very dangerous, but it also gave them a weakness. If the network could be disrupted, they might turn on each other. The immediate battle was won when the combined fleet destroyed the attacking Devourer ships. But the victory felt hollow because long-range sensors showed something much worse coming. A massive fleet of hundreds of organic ships was heading toward their position. The main Devourer armada had found them. Admiral Cathvar thanked the humans for their help. He said he never expected the people his race had tried to destroy would come to save them. Lisa Turner told him that sometimes old enemies had to work together against new ones. She said humans understood that some fights were bigger than personal hatred. As the refugee ships prepared to evacuate the damaged colony vessel, Jake thought about how strange war could be. Yesterday the Zephyrians were humanity's greatest enemy. Today they were allies against something even worse. Tomorrow they might have to trust each other with their lives. The sensors showed the approaching Devourer fleet getting closer every hour. Soon they would arrive and the real battle would begin. Jake hoped that humans and Zephyrians together would be strong enough to stop an enemy that had already consumed most of the galaxy. If they failed, then both races would join the others, trapped forever inside the organic ships of the Devourers. Commander Jake Martinez walked through the long metal halls of the UES Liberty. The ship was huge and it floated at the edge of human space like a giant metal guardian. Jake had been living on this ship for 3 years now, and he knew every corner of it. The Liberty was the biggest and strongest ship in Earth's war fleet. It had big guns and thick armor and a crew of 5,000 people who all had one job to do. They were waiting for the Zephyrians to come back. Jake remembered the war from 10 years ago. He was just a young officer then, but he saw what the Zephyrians could do. Their ships came from the dark space between stars and they attacked human colonies without warning. They had weapons that could cut through metal like paper and shields that could stop almost anything humans threw at them. The war lasted 2 years and humans lost badly. Earth itself almost fell. Only luck and some very brave people saved humanity from being wiped out completely. Now the Zephyrians were gone, but everyone knew they would return. Earth had been building ships and training soldiers ever since the war ended. The Liberty and 50 other big ships waited at the edge of the solar system. They watched the empty space and listened for any sign that the enemy was coming back. Jake walked into the communication center where Lieutenant Amy Brooks sat at her station. Amy was young and smart, and she could hear signals from very far away. She had been listening to space for months, but today something was different. Her face looked worried and her hands moved quickly over her controls. Amy looked up when Jake came in. She pointed at her screen where strange symbols were moving across it like green water. Jake could not read the symbols, but he knew what they were. It was Zephyrian writing. Amy spoke in a quiet voice. She said the signal was coming from very far away in a part of space where no one was supposed to be. The message was broken and hard to understand, but she could make out some words. It was a distress call. Someone was asking for help and they were very scared. Jake felt his heart beat faster. The Zephyrians never asked for help. They were proud and strong and they thought other races were weak. If they were sending a distress call, then something very bad was happening to them. Captain Lisa Turner came into the room. She was tall and had gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Lisa had fought in the war, and she had scars on her hands from when her first ship was destroyed. She did not like the Zephyrians, but she was a good captain who always did what was right. Amy played the message again. The voice that came through the speakers was different from human voices. It sounded like metal grinding against stone, but Jake could hear the fear in it. The alien was saying the same words over and over. "Help us, they are coming. We cannot stop them." "Please help us," Lisa asked Amy where the signal was coming from. Amy pointed at a star map on her wall screen. The signal came from a place that was very far from Earth and very far from known Zephyrian space. It was an empty space where no one lived and no one went. Jake looked at the map and felt cold. If the Zephyrians were out there and they were in trouble, then what was attacking them? What could be so dangerous that it scared the aliens who had almost destroyed humanity? Lisa called Admiral Kevin Ross on Earth. The Admiral was an old man who had lost his son in the war. He did not trust the Zephyrians and he did not want to help them. Ross told Lisa to ignore the signal and keep watching for enemy attacks. He said it might be a trap to make humans leave their defensive positions. But the signal kept coming. Every few minutes, the scared alien voice would call out again, "Help us, they are coming. We cannot stop them. Please help us." Each time the voice sounded more afraid and more desperate. Amy found more pieces of the message. She put them together like a puzzle, and slowly the picture became clear. The Zephyrians were not alone out there. Something else was with them, something that was hunting them and destroying their ships. The aliens called these hunters the Devourers, and they said the Devourers ate everything in their path. Jake thought about this. The Zephyrians had fought humans and won most battles. If something was beating the Zephyrians easily, then that something was very dangerous. Maybe it was dangerous enough to threaten Earth too. Lisa made a decision that would change everything. She called her officers to the bridge and told them they were going to help the Zephyrians. Many of her crew did not like this idea. They remembered the war and the friends they had lost. But Lisa said they had to know what was out there. If something could destroy the Zephyrians, then it might come for humans next. Admiral Ross was angry when Lisa told him her plan. He ordered her to stay at her position and wait for new orders. But Lisa had already made up her mind. She took 3 ships with her, the Liberty and 2 smaller, destroyers called the Thunder and the Storm. They left the safety of human space and jumped into hyperspace, heading for the distress signal. The ships traveled through the strange blue light of hyperspace. Jake thought about what they might find. He hoped they were doing the right thing. The Zephyrians were their enemies, but maybe some enemies were worse than others. Maybe sometimes you had to help your enemy to fight something even more dangerous. The Liberty and her sister ships raced through space toward an unknown threat. Behind them, Earth's remaining fleet watched and waited. Ahead of them, something was hunting the most dangerous aliens humans had ever known. Jake wondered if they were flying toward their salvation or their doom.